So when one thinks of time reversal, actually the correct representation of this is where is my pen? So the word actually one should look for is motion reversal. So time reversal is equivalent to actually motion reversal. So which is the original word used by Wigner when he used it in this context of quantum mechanics. So what does it mean? So in classical mechanics, we know that if I look at just the classical mechanics equation of motion, d2 is dt2 equal to f, and I take t to minus t, this equation is invariant unless there is some non-conservative force or frictional force present, which is a different context. And that doesn't, we don't need to bother about it at this discussion or quantum mechanics, because the origin of those forces is microscopic, which means it's the particle, the atoms interact in a way that gives you, if you consider the atom-atom interaction between the surface and the object which is having some friction, then you won't such kind of non-conservative forces will not arise. So it's so we will just think about a single particle motion or like a, or within a conservative force. So in that, the Newton's equation or classical mechanics has a time reversal invariance that we know. Now what does it mean actually? It means that if you look at the motion of a particle from one point to another, let's say you can think it as, let's say you are looking at the motion of a pendulum, or motion of, you are throwing a ball upwards and it is coming back downwards, like that. So if you take a picture of that or make a movie of that motion and you run it backwards, you won't be able to tell that whether it is moving upward or backward. So that is basically the meaning of motion reversal or time reversal in the context of in any context, in classical mechanics or whatever. And we say that that system is time reversal symmetric. So in other words, so you can also put it a slightly different language by saying, okay, if I give it some velocity and this guy goes here, when it reaches here, it velocity it becomes zero velocity, because and then it comes back. Now if you do the opposite thing, which means if you take the ball here, take the blob of the pendulum here and release it from here with zero velocity, then when it reaches here, will it have the same velocity as it is as it was before? So that is the kind of meaning by time reversal. Or, and in a broader context, you want to say that if I know the uh, state of a system right now, can I trace back the state of a system in past? Or if I run this movie backward, will I get the same law of motion? So that is the question a time reversal implies, and it is very important aspect of equation of motions or dynamics or anything, because it gives you a lot of structure about the system. And in quantum mechanics, you will see that it is very important, because whether a system is time reversal or not, that gives you a very precise measurable consequence on its energy eigenstates and energy eigenvalues and eigenstates and all those things. And that means even if you are not actually reversing the time, which is the picture you get in your head when you use the word time reversal, you are there is an important consequence of the fact that whether your equations of motions or laws are such that when you run the movie backwards, the laws doesn't change. Okay, but when you and also it's like some of you might be confused at this point, and if you have read some of these pop science articles which tells you about the arrow of time and all that, so note that that is an entirely a context of statistics or many particle system and statistics of probability. When you come in the question of reversal, or sorry, when you come to the question of arrow of time, which means time only moves forward, this kind of statement which tells you, okay, if you drop a egg, the egg will break into parts. Then it will never happen, there is no possibility in nature that the egg will come backwards and it will unbreak itself. That's a ruled out possibility that is explained by entropy. And when you have to explain such thing, you have to bring statistics into it. So the statement is actually the probability of that happening is almost zero, and the time it takes to get to that state is order of the time, like lifetime of universe. But it's not forbidden within the framework of classical mechanics. It's forbidden within the framework of possibilities, or it's infinite time taking process, and that is quantized. This conceptual idea is quantized using the concept of entropy, which we'll learn probably in StatMech. And to see that very quickly, you can try to do this simple problem that you take two particles, 1 and 2, and put it in a box, and you ask the question, what is the probability that both of them will be on the left side of the box? So if I put two particles, so it could be either LR, or it could be RR, or LL, or it could be RL. So the question is, what is the possibility it will be in one side? So you can calculate this probability. Therefore, then the next question you can ask, if I put n particle, what is the probability all n of them will be in one side? You will see that probability is 1 by 2 to the power n, and that's an extremely unlikely probability in a when n is large. And that is why you say that when you put a large number of particle, it's almost never possible that the, like, if you release some gas in a room, or there is some air in room, all the air is in the left side of the room, there is zero air molecule on the right side of the room. That's an impossible scenario that you, and that is why it is impossible, that you, because it is well, it's not impossible, it's an unlikely scenario, because the probability of that is incredibly low when n is like 10 to the power 23. And that's it, that's what one uses to discuss this context of arrow of time, that why time moves in one direction, why something happens and it cannot be undone, like any process that increases the entropy, that cannot be undone. And that's a defined principle. It requires many particle and probability. It has nothing to do with equations of motion of a single particle, or equation of motion when there is no statistics is involved, no probability is involved. So within the framework of classical mechanics, time is always reversible. So that is the main statement, and you want it to be that way. Whenever you are formulating any theory or anything, you want it to carry that property of your observable world, or that is what you know to be true. That in simple observed scenario like this ball or pendulum experiment, unless there is a this kind of scenario is involved, you know that this you can always do that, even in principle and even in practice. Okay, so now let's try to implement this thing in quantum mechanics and see, if I have a Schrodinger equation, can I implement t going to minus t? So this is something we talked about very briefly in last semester, but let's now do it formally. So let's say I have I h bar del psi del t is h psi t, also x. Of course, it has some x coordinate. So can someone say that what is the problem and what can we do about it? So if I take t to minus t, what problem will we encounter? So if I say my transformation is like that, the tau is my time so my main object is this psi t. So tau is my time reversal operation. So what it does, it just takes tau to, sorry, it takes psi to minus tx. So can you see what's the consequence of that? Will that work? Am I connected?
Yes.
Okay.
So the eigenvalues will come negative,
Yeah,
right?
the eigenvalues will come negative means the whole thing will pick up a negative sign.
The energy.
So which is not
Yes,
a
yes.
which is not the form of Schrodinger equation we know. So if I
Mhm.
just take the t to minus t, this minus will appear here. So I'm taking it out here. So it will, or you can alternatively rewrite it like that. I del minus t psi minus t, or I can write it using this new language. Tau psi tx minus h psi tau h psi tx. So this will be must. I want my this tau psi tx to satisfy this equation, and that is how I desire it to be like, because if there is a minus sign, that should be countered by a minus sign. But if I just naively take t to minus t, that will not happen. It will just pick up an extra minus sign. So what is the solution for that? How do I fix this minus sign? Any idea? What kind of equation this tau psi tx is satisfying?
So if the t is what you say, the minus of the t is somehow quenched. So if we have powers of say even numbers, 2 or 4 in the equation, so that will quench the minus sign.
Yeah, that is a little stretch. Of course, that solution, but that has no reason to have there. But one simple way we can think: if I take a complex conjugate of this equation, and what we are getting is that we are doing the transformation in this way, that when t is going to minus t, the I is also going to minus I. So this is a peculiar prescription, but that is what we need to preserve it. So I will now try to justify you that why do you need this complex conjugation, and how do you formulate that in two different ways. One is I'll do it from the operator side, another is I'll do it from the wave function side. Okay. So yeah, so it is indeed that it's a, so what it turns out, that this tau actually doesn't take a psi to psi, psi minus t. It takes it to psi star minus tx, not just psi, because then it satisfies this whole equation, satisfies the complex conjugate Schrodinger equation. And why that star appears? So then you might say, oh no, this is not really a symmetry, because a symmetry means that object after transformation will comes back to itself. But if instead of coming back to itself, it goes to some starred object or like complex conjugate, then it is not coming back to itself. That is indeed true, but we know that for a wave function, wave functions are rays in Hilbert space. So for them, the sign, the star is not going to play any role in the measurable quantities, and that is what we will learn formally. So that is basically the rough idea, that how time reversal is going to be different from the regular symmetries. And let me review a little bit about the time reversal symmetries in a little, or the aspects of symmetries in classical mechanics, and then I will go to these aspects one by one in the context of quantum mechanics, and you will see that what are all the types of symmetries you encounter. Okay. So this was just a introduction, that how things are going to be, how there are types of symmetry which are not like the symmetries we know. So for example, so let's start with all the aspects of symmetry. So what happens in the when a system is symmetric, and what are the consequences of that? The first thing is that in classical mechanics, we know that generally that symmetries leads to a conservation law. So that is the Noether's theorem, right? So symmetries will give you a conservation law, and when, so what kind of symmetries will do that? So this is the Noether theorem. Noether theorem is of course not for all kind of symmetries. It is for continuous symmetries, which means there is, you can think of this operation as something which is infinitesimally close to doing nothing. And then we know that for that kind of system, you can have a generator of this operation. We learned it in great detail in last semester, and they have a Lie algebra description. Algebra comes for quantum mechanics, but we know that there is a Lie group description. Okay, now we also learned that for some symmetries, so they are called dynamical symmetries, which you also learned. Symmetries like the Runge-Lenz and all, they are actually in this category of symmetries. It's only that it's not dynamical, or they called like hidden or accidental, these kind of things, because it's not so easy to find out this conservation law, because or symmetry, or the mathematical form, because they are not, they comes from the specific dynamics, and it doesn't and once you find it, then it falls in the same category of this, because you will find the associated Noether theorem and conservation law and all that. But it has an important consequence in observables in quantum mechanics, which I'll revise in a moment later. But you know, it gives you some degeneracy which you cannot explain, and then you try to find what is giving it. But it's not a totally different kind of symmetry. It's the same kind of symmetry. Okay. Now you learned in great detail another type of symmetry. It is gauge symmetry. So you also learned in the you learned it gauge symmetry is there in both classical mechanics and electrodynamics within the realm of classical physics, and we talked about it some detail in the last class and last or first class, and then we realized that gauge symmetries are not really a system symmetry, but rather it's a symmetry of how you, or symmetry of your theory, or how you describe the system. And there are very far reaching consequences of that, because gauge symmetry is not only like classical mechanics, ed and gravity. Especially gravity, it's very interesting that how gauge theory works, that you will see that if I, let's say if I define my coordinate to be like that, some Cartesian coordinate, and then I state that if I distort my if I can do how I define my coordinate system, my physical theory should not be dependent on. So if I define my coordinate system to be like that, some wiggly local distorted thing which is locally different and all, and if I demand my theory is same as physical observable, and what I measure or what I calculate should not depend on how I define my coordinate system. So this is the context of gauge theory, which we also understand in the using this financial model in the last in the previous class. So that will lead to the gauge field in the gravity in classical mechanics, and gravity can be understood that from that point of view, which you'll learn later in general relativity. Okay, so these are the kind of symmetries, main kind of symmetries, and there is also these discrete symmetries, which is like space inversion, mirror reflection, which you probably have learned in chemistry or somewhere. So mirror reflection and time reversal. So these are all these discrete kind of symmetry which you have learned again in classical mechanics and quantum mechanics, mainly in classical mechanics context. Definitely you have learned in various example. For example, you know that we already discussed that a classical mechanics, the Newton's equation or Hamiltonian Lagrangian formalism is time reversal independent, and you know the Maxwell's equation is also time reversal independent in electrodynamics. But there is a little bit of subtlety which I just want to specify in case you have not noticed that. But this you can go back and look back and look and think about this in some detail. So the subtlety is this: we know that the magnetic field is not time reversal invariant. So BRT, so under time reversal invariance, is becomes minus B R minus T. And this simply comes from the fact that you can simply convince yourself about this by saying if a electron is moving in a circle, it generates this kind of this magnetic moment. And if you reverse in time, that means the electron will move in this way, because velocity is not a time reversal invariant. So the magnetic field will also flip sign. So in that way, if you think that way, you will see that if magnetic field is not time reversal symmetric, then you might wonder that how come Maxwell's equation is time reversal symmetry. If you write down the Maxwell's equation and put T2 minus T and B2 minus B, everything remains fine. And the reason is that I don't know if you have thought about it, but I want you to look it up and think about this. We'll not stretch it much further here, because will be more on the quantum mechanics, not in this classical domain. So if you consider the source of the magnetic field, which means if you think you have an experiment where you have some experimental setup and you are you are switching on a magnetic field in your lab. Now if you want to ask what happens when I run this movie backward, then you will find that you also have to flip this magnetic field to make sense, to keep it symmetric. So that then you might naively think that the electrodynamics is not time reversal symmetric, but that is not true. Because if you also consider the fact that whatever is causing that magnetic field, which you can think it as a particle in a circle or something, then if you include that also in your system, then the whole system together is time reversal symmetric. So that is the basic idea. And then that problem doesn't appear anymore. So that is why that's a physical thinking, and it is of course it reflects in the Maxwell's equation, because Maxwell's equation remains time reversal symmetry. So that is the whole idea of this kind of time reversal symmetry in the entire classical mechanics. except when you don't have friction, but friction can be understood as a microscopic phenomena. So if you think it that way, then within classical dynamics there is no time reversal symmetry. Sorry, there is always time reversal symmetry. Okay, so that is a rough overview of this. However, there is one catch, which I don't know if you have discussed this. So you must have studied this E square plus B, the Lagrangian of classical mechanics, sorry, classical electrodynamics. And the Lagrangian is following: E square minus B square, right? You have studied that. But have you studied a Lagrangian with this term? Did you encounter this term anywhere, any of you?
So I don't think we did Lagrangian in electrodynamics as far as I know.
Oh, you didn't do the Lagrangian Hamiltonian description of electrodynamics?
I don't know what you mean. Like we did the movement of a particle in an electromagnetic here, what you say, field, and
No, but
we
I'm
didn't do.
have you have you written down a Lagrangian or a Hamiltonian?
No, I don't think we ever wrote down a
We
formula.
didn't do it.
And then worked out Maxwell's equation from there by using
No, no. We
Euler
didn't do
Lagrange
that.
equation. Oh, okay.
No,
So,
only
No, so
okay, so maybe you read that because it's a useful way of thinking, and it appears in QFT or something. People will this is more. It is discussed in Griffiths, I think chapter 7 or chapter 9 somewhere. I don't know. And you look it up because it is. If you take course of QFT and all, then it will appear there. And I don't know if they will whoever will teach you that will assume it you know it or not. And so any of the beyond master students, like who have master degree or those who are PhD, you have done it, Aman? You, I mean, I see you raised hand, but I don't. Okay, have you done? Oh, you have not done it either. Okay. And what about Rishabh, Krishna? Any of them are if any of them are present?
Yes, sir.
we have
We
done.
did that.
Yeah. So where
We
did
did
you do
this.
it?
So in electrodynamics,
Yeah.
when Yogendran sir was taking our lecture on
Oh,
like
okay. So it depends on the teacher. Then it's not a syllabus thing. It
yeah.
depends on who is teaching you. Okay. Look it up in the books, and it's very easy. It's nothing complicated. And in Griffiths it's there, or maybe in some yeah, it's there. Griffiths and Goldstein both will have this. That how do you write down the how do you formulate electrodynamics in Lagrangian Hamiltonian language? That is the basic thing. It's very simple. And if you will learn all this covariant thing and everything, and uh, like the covariant formalism, right? That you use this F vector, F nu mu del mu a nu del nu a mu. You know this formalism, right? The BSMS.
no. We don't know this formalism either. We haven't
Oh,
done the tensorial part of
okay.
classical mechanics. Classical mechanics.
Or electrodynamics.
We
I'm talking
did.
about
We did
electrodynamics.
a bit of the
Electrodynamics,
tensor.
we did a
We did a
bit,
bit
sir.
of the tensor stuff at the end,
Yeah,
not
yeah.
completely.
Okay,
A
so
bit
you
of.
look.
We only did it for relativity.
So I really don't need it, but I feel that, and it may not. You may go away the entire BSMS coursework without ever knowing it. I don't think this kind of question also appears in exams or something, or competitive exam. But it is a very useful and powerful language. So I would, and this is the early part of semester, so you have time, maybe a little bit time to read other things. So I'll suggest you to familiarize yourself with this formalism and this formula. And it is an extremely convenient way. So you can write down the entire Maxwell equation in one line, just one line, a very tiny line of equation. And that is why it is a very and then from there you can derive the wave equations and the entire optical all the electromagnetic wave equation and everything. And it's a very compact and powerful tool. It's nothing new physically, but it's a very elegant tool, and that is used in many places in elsewhere. And it also, this thing gives you a lot of idea. But for example, you know that if you look at the action, typically the entire electrodynamics is contained in this E square minus B square action. But if you add a theta term, which is theoretically allowed but not found in usual normal nature experiments, it leads to a very interesting consequence that is called axion electrodynamics, and later people found experimental evidence for that in certain kind of insulators and also in high energy QCD experiments. So it's a very interesting subject, and I want you to familiarize yourself, and I think you are ready for that. You just have to do some self study. Okay, so and you will see that Maxwell equation doesn't. So Maxwell equation has this time reversal symmetry, even though the magnetic field itself doesn't have, and there is not a big deal because we know velocity is neither time reversal symmetric. It's one quantity, one variable may not be time reversal symmetric, but the overall equations and the physical theory must be time reversal symmetric. That is what we expect and naively want in a classical theory. Now I want the quantum theory also to have the same properties of classical theories as far as symmetry is concerned, as far as measurables and observables are concerned. We don't care that what we have to do, what we have to manipulate at the level of non-observables, which is wave function and all that. But we want our observables, which is expectation values, operators, interference, or probabilities, that pattern, those things to be time reversal. Our theory must be such that those things carry all these, not only time reversal invariance, all these properties. And you saw that the entire game we played in the symmetry chapter in last semester was based on that, and we found the following. First of all, so now we come to quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics, we want first of all my psi t. So apart from Aman, is there any other post MSc PhD students? Okay, they probably didn't join yet or something, they don't know, I don't know. So they are missing like first few lectures, but it should be okay because these people had done quantum mechanics too. It's a revision for them. Okay, I guess it's not there. Okay, so so in quantum mechanics, we demand the same thing to happen. So let's say if I have a symmetry operation, and I represent that symmetry operation by some operators u, and we want, of course, this operator to be unitary in order to conserve probability. So what are the properties I demand? I demand that the measurables. So the measurable is this, it's the probability, which is psi t mod square, or this kind of transition probability or like overlap probabilities, which is one state is psi t, another state is phi t. So these kind of things, we want them also to be invariant. So these are the two kind of objects I want to be invariant, are my physical objects, are my physical measurables, and that which affects my observation on like interference pattern I see on a screen or something. I want my theory to be such that whatever symmetry I'm talking about, it must not keep this thing as expected or as we expect from a particular symmetry operation. So how we learn that, how to deal with that? We've learned the subject of representation, where we the operator u, we have to design the operator or construct the operator to which is a representation of that symmetry group or symmetry operation, and that can be of infinite dimension, because of course this Hilbert space of this psi t can be infinite dimensional. So this can be an infinite dimensional matrix. It could be a 2D matrix if I'm looking at a 2-level system. It could be a 3D matrix, 3x3 matrix if I look at a 3-level system. We learn to work out all these things in the context of spin angular momentum algebra, and we saw that there is a lot of structure in this theory. Like, so basically this gives you the representation. So what we'll do today, we'll try to find the representation of time reversal symmetry, basically knowing that what kind of properties it possesses of a symmetry operation. We learned about this. We learned about this irreducible representation and reducible representation, and this multi-component wave functions. This came naturally in this context, and especially like, and there we realize that the spins can be of two types, either integer or half integer, depending on their rotation properties under this under some rotational symmetry operation. And landed on this Pinot description. So that was basically all. And then from this, another quantity we want to be invariant, and that is the expectation value. So expectation value is basically psi t a psi. So this I want to also hold the symmetry, and we realize that we can either do the symmetry operation on the psi or on the operator, but they has to be consistent with the fact that all the observables are invariant under the symmetry or transformed in a certain way as I expect. Which means if I give a rotation to a object which is not rotational symmetry, we can predict how this rotation works by the rotation matrix in classical mechanics, which is always 3D, because in classical mechanics the object is described as a 3-dimensional vector, but in quantum mechanics the object can be described as an arbitrary dimensional vector depending on what object it is. So then we found the representation for that, and we discussed this whole subject from that framework. So that is basically the whole story of continuous symmetry. Okay, not the whole story. There is one more thing to be notified, that a symmetry always corresponds to degeneracy. So that is what we learned. And we learned the vice versa is also true, but it is not always easy to detect that. So for example, if I find a degeneracy and cannot find a symmetry, then we tag them as accidental, hidden, or this kind of symmetry. But then it turns out that we can, in principle, always find something which is conserved. So that is related to a conserved quantity. So we again came to the context of Runge-Lenz vectors, and we looked at these 2D and 3D SU2 symmetric harmonic oscillators and looked at how to construct their conserved quantities or deal with their accidental degeneracy. And conserved quantity again means it's some operator. So any quantity or degree of freedom which is observable in quantum mechanics, it's an operator that must commute with the Hamiltonian. So that's all we learned in this context. Again, we learned in the first lecture again about gauge symmetries, and we learned that we just did it one lecture back, so I'll not go over not go on to give a short revision on that. We learned that how gauge symmetry manifests itself by a local transformation in the wave function. So that is basically all the kind of symmetries we have learned so far. Now we will add this kind of symmetries, the discrete symmetry. So in order to do that, let me do a classification of symmetries and give you at least one example in each. So in all the symmetries in quantum mechanics can be divided in two categories. One is usual, that is, I call it transposing, and I will not go into the detail of that because it requires you to have a concept of many particle or negative energy or a vacuum which is not zero particle vacuum. So this kind of concept you need, which you learn in many body physics only. So I am not going to discuss this right now, or you at least need a Lorentz invariant theory, which will come. So we will discuss this near the end of the course. But we'll talk about the usual symmetries, and of course there is another class of symmetry which is gauge symmetries, which can be also continuous. Continuous means it's U1, SU2, SU3. U1 is ED, SU2 is electroweak, SU3 is QCD. Or it could be discrete. So this is discrete examples are more available in condensed matter or in other example like Z2 and so on. But these usual symmetries are mainly what we will discuss in this course. So here we already discussed this and gave you an outline of this, but didn't go in detail. So the usual symmetries are of two types. One is linear, another is antilinear. So I'll come to describe what is. So transposing symmetries are also two types, linear and antilinear, but I'll not talk about it right now. So these linears can be again of two types. One is continuous, another is discrete. And antilinear is always discrete. So what are some examples of that? And then there is also another category which falls in the linear, but it is also discrete. So discrete but of a different type. So I'll put it in a soft third category. So what is an example of continuous symmetry? That is what we studied. That is translation, rotation, all that, which is a generator and Lie group and Lie algebra description. Discrete is also we studied in last semester, but we didn't go very formally about it. that is parity, which means we discuss this kind of wave function where Vx is V of minus x, or like, okay, let me call it, to be more accurate, space inversion. And we learned that what kind of wave function or what kind of structure will it have if Bx is plus minus Vx, but we will learn it formally in the next class, a little more formally. Antilinear is discrete, and time, the example is time reversal invariant. We'll come in a moment that why I'm calling it antilinear. And we know that, of course, that we already saw in this quick example here, that as when I look at time reversal symmetry, it is not so simple in the framework of just by saying take T2 minus T. We have to do something extra, and that extra is taking a complex conjugate or taking the I2 minus I, and that extra stuff makes it not a linear operator but rather an antilinear or anti-unitary operator. And it's also discrete because it doesn't have a Noether theorem, which means since it is not a continuous transformation, you cannot have a generator or a Lie group Lie algebra type description. So that will be basically our syllabus is basically, so this is what we learned in QM1, and here we will discuss about this, and this we already discussed, and maybe this, maybe, because there is another very important class of symmetry which is called charge conjugation that appears in this context. And these three symmetries together, CPT, charge conjugation, parity, and time reversal, is a very important discussion in physics. And we will learn all these things in an appropriate time in this course. So that is basically the outline of this subject. So now let's look at a little in-depth, take a little in-depth view of this time reversal. So today we will entirely focus the rest of the class on time reversal symmetry. So let's go for that. So let me open my note, and if you have any question, you can ask. Okay.
So which was the third type of symmetry that you were talking in the linear, usual and linear?
Okay. So this is yeah, sorry, I forgot that. So this is actually a semi-continuous type, but neither space inversion or category. So these are called lattice symmetries. So what is the lattice symmetry? That you will learn it in great detail in solid state physics. And that symmetry has a very interesting consequence. So when you are in a solid, you know how you describe a solid. Actually, this is like a very, yeah. So let me tell you a very quick outline. So a solid is basically like a lattice, right? So you can think a solid is like that. So what's the main difference between solid, liquid, and gas? So I'm not entering into the liquid gas distinction because liquid and gas distinction is very tricky. And tricky for the reason that the difference between a solid and a gas is quite huge, because of course, you know, a solid means a periodic arrangement of atoms, and it has certain property like hardness, rigidity, that kind of property. But a gas means particles are moving here and there like that. And if you observe them for a finite amount of time, you will find everything is symmetric around you. Like if you are inside a box of gas, you will find everything is symmetric around you. And then you can design your theory in terms of a translation symmetry, using translation symmetry. If you are in a liquid, it's also same, but there is of course a difference between liquid and gas, because liquids have certain flow property and certain dynamical properties which are different, and that's why it's a very subtle difference and very interesting difference which you learn in other courses. But solid is totally different from that, because if you are inside a solid, all the directions are not equivalent. If you look at this direction, you will see you will encounter nothing. If you look at this direction, you will encounter a finite number of atoms. If you look at this direction, you encounter some other number of atoms. If you look at this direction, you will encounter something else. So there is no symmetry in the space, and the symmetry, but it doesn't have a full symmetry. Of course, there is a symmetry, but it is not a full symmetry like that one. Symmetry is of different nature. And most importantly, the simplest one is this translation symmetry. So for example, we know that if I move my system by a certain amount in one direction, everything should be invariant. But here you have to move it only by a amount such that this atom overlaps with that atom. So this is called lattice symmetry or lattice translation symmetry. So that means you have a symmetry, but it is not continuous, but it is neither of that type. So here you have a conservation law, and you have something called lattice momentum, which is quantized, and that's a very interesting and separate subject which you learn in solid state physics, and that is why I put it neither in this category nor in that category. Okay, so now we will go on to discuss the details of time reversal symmetry in quantum mechanics. But before that, we'll quickly once more go over something. So let's see. So I covered this. Okay, so let's see why we need this anti-unitarity and all those things, and how does it affect the time reversal in QM. So that is our main agenda. So first, of course, we notice that the thing we want to keep invariant is this object. So if my goal was to keep invariant just this, if my goal is to just keep it, so if I have a set of operator, some operator which is taking me some u operator, which takes psi goes to psi prime by this u operator, and phi goes to phi prime. So normally I would say that if I demand that this is like this, that phi psi is equal to psi prime phi prime. So this is what we normally demand in any other symmetry. And that will of course give us the desired result, which is I want this to be invariant. In order that to happen, what property do I need on U? And you know this, right?
Unitary.
Yeah, you want it to be unitary. So that will give me that. But as you can see that this is not all, because we can also say that equivalently that this is also good enough. So this is also good enough, which means it includes the possibility that it is just not just equal to this, but it can be also equal to this and star of this. So it turns out when you include that possibility, that opens a whole new world, which is the world of anti-unitary or anti-linear operators. And time reversal actually falls into that framework. So there is a theorem about that, that is Wigner's theorem. So there is a textbook by Wigner on this, and there he specifies states some 1940 textbook that all symmetry operators, and all means all in this category, everything, all symmetry possible, all types of symmetry possible in quantum mechanics is within this table. And we will see an example of each type in appropriate time, but roughly now we will focus on this part, and we already focused on one of these. So all symmetry operators in QM are represented by either an unitary operator, or anti-unitary operator. So what are the anti-unitary operator and how do they come? So anti-unitary operator are those which satisfy this kind of property with a star, and they are defined to be in this form. So if I have a unitary operator, it does the following. If I have a state chi, it takes that state to chi prime. So let me call it chi1, chi1. If I have a state chi2, it takes it to chi2 prime. So this is the unitary operator that is doing that. So now if I have a superposition state, that is chi1 plus chi2, it is taken to C1 chi1 prime, C2 chi2 prime. You have seen that there is nothing new into this. We know how unitary operator works. So this is unitary. What anti-unitary operator does? Anti-unitary operator takes chi1 and chi2 to this chi1 prime and chi2 prime in a way such that if I take a c1 c2 chi1 chi2, this kind of a state, this anti-unitary operator, let me say it is a tilde, it does the following. So it takes a conjugate of this coefficient, which is the probability amplitude, and that's a complex number, and it has a very important consequence, a very serious consequence on the whole system and physics. So this is the definition of anti-unitary or anti-linear operator. So this is called linearity relation, and this is anti-linearity. Anti-linearity, and we'll see what kind of what kind of structure of U will satisfy this. Now, before I go into the all these details, so there it can be shown in with some very 2 lines of algebra, which you can check from Sakurai, that any operator that to satisfy this can have this structure U times K. So where U is some unitary operator multiplied by, so K implies complex conjugation. So this is a mathematical property. Any operator which has this property, which you can of course see, because this U takes you this to this. If you define your U prime as U times K, then that K will of course take a complex conjugate of that. Complex conjugate. So I represent it by K because the C is reserved later for charge conjugation. So that is why everyone uses the letter K. So that is what I want, and we will see that that structure satisfies this demand. And now what is the we will see that what is the relation of that with how that gives us the desired result for time reversal symmetry. Okay. So let's revise 1 or 2 more things about unitary operators. That if we know that if I have a unitary operator which does this, which has the following consequence. So if it is a continuous operator or continuous transformation, you know it can be written in this form, I epsilon t. But t is the generator of this, and epsilon is some tiny amount of transformation. It could be translation or rotation, whatever you are looking at. And in order to satisfy u dagger u equal to 1, t must be equal to t dagger. So it must be an Hermitian operator. And we know in quantum mechanics, of course, the generator, an operator which is a physical observable, has to be Hermitian. And almost all the operators we represented is some kind of generator in quantum mechanics. We encountered momentum, angular momentum, all these interesting operators we saw. They are generator of one or the other kind of symmetry operation, or like generator. Yeah. Okay. Now, what is the equivalent of that here? So I'll come to the equivalent in a moment, but let's see what kind of property it satisfies. So let's say I also demand that psi a psi must go to psi u dagger a u psi. So this is the expectation value that must be also invariant, but in order to do that, it operates on this guy. So a goes to u dagger a u, and then you can apply these forms, and that gives you the form that a goes to a minus I epsilon ta. That is also something we learned in last semester. So this is a very important relation, the commutator between the operator of observable which you are looking and the generator of that transformation, and that tells you everything about how this object transforms. So that is what we learned. And now we will see what are the equivalent of this and what consequences that is had on quantum mechanics. So let's say I have a quantum mechanical system and I want the symmetry. I want the following symmetry, that if one observer is looking at the dynamics, or like one set of observer means one set of experiment and one lab is looking at the dynamics, and the dynamics is given by psi t. So now I'm coming back to QM in the context of time transition symmetry. So this is one set of, and then a symmetry transformed set is another set is this. So I put an arrow. So this is how this thing transforms. So if I look at this, if I want these two things to be symmetric under the same Hamiltonian, but these are the system is transformed by some operation U, I want it also to satisfy this kind of a relation, which means e to the minus IHT U psi 0. Now, in order that to happen, you must be able to take the U across this, which means in order, if I write this side of the equation and that side of the equation, it must satisfy a property like this, U minus IHT to the power minus IHT of U. So if you expand this thing, it gives you this property, that's HU is 0. So it must commute like that. And we learned it in the context of writing things in this infinitesimal form. But here I am jumping those steps, but I'm just saying this will give you that. And if HU is 0, that also tells you that if this unitary operator, generator will also satisfy this, and HT will be equal to 0. So that is the general expectation for a generic symmetry, generic unitary symmetry. It commutes with the Hamiltonian. So now let's see what is the equivalent of that in time reversal. So this beautiful structure of these commutating things and operators commutating and all that, that will be disturbed in the context of the time reversal. And let's see how. So let's say I want similarly a psi t. So now I'm coming to time reversal. So I have a psi t which goes to e to the power minus IHT psi 0. And now I have a ut u psi t which I want to satisfy the property. That's e to the power minus IHT u psi 0. So this is my u, curly u. And I also notice, but since it is a time reversal symmetry, which means you won't be able to do that like this. So it must be e to the power minus IHT u, that is u e to the power IHT. So notice I continuously drop this factor of h bar which comes here and there. So I just keep it 1 just for the sake of reducing clutter. So because time reversal symmetry is doing this, because whether you apply the u fast or not, that means it is satisfying a relation like that. So u, if I keep the IH together, so it must be satisfying a relation like that. Minus IH is equal to minus IH. Or equivalently, you can say it to be IHU is equal to minus IUH. So what if I take away the I from here and there? If I just remove this I, so if I take, so actually more accurate way to write it is this way, because I applying the U on this. If I take away the I, this will give me HU minus UH. So it is telling me if I have an operator which is like a time reversal symmetry, which flips the sign of the time, then it must anti-commute with the Hamiltonian, not commute. Okay? Sorry, it must satisfy a defined relation. I mean to say that. So this is the meaning is HU is equal to 0, not HU commuting to be 0. So this is the first indication that not all symmetries are represented by operators which commute with the Hamiltonian. So it can anti-commute. But this has an immediate problem. If it is anti-commuting, it has an immediate problem. So let's try to see what is that problem. So the problem is, so let's say if I have my Schrodinger equation, so the problem with anti-commuting with operators, anti-commuting with H. So the problem is here. So let's say I look at the Schrodinger equation. So if you are lost a little bit in the algebra, you can look it up, you can check it on your own hand, but let me just give you an outline of what's happening here. So we started by saying that I want an operator which represent time reversal symmetry. And when I tried to do that, I landed with that the fact that this operation anti-commutes with the Hamiltonian. And now we will see what is the anti-commutation problem. So if I have a H psi that is equal to E psi, so now I apply UH psi is equal to E psi, EU psi. So this is my U. But now we know that this guy is basically H U psi. And this minus sign will come here. So minus E U psi. So that tells me my system, if it has an energy E, it will have also an energy minus E eigenstate, whose the corresponding state is U psi and psi. So it tells me that if I have anti-commutation, which means the system will have for every energy E there will be a minus E. If the state E has a eigenstate psi, this will be U psi. Now this is contradictory to what we know, because let's say we are looking at a simple harmonic oscillator. It will have all the energy states which goes from like n plus half h cut omega onwards and it go to infinity, but it doesn't have a minus energy partner of that, right? And if you give that partner, it will be unstable system, because we discussed last time that why time cannot be an operator, because if you try to give time an operator status, it will run into the problem of demanding a minus energy state which can go to infinity. And that way the system will always try to move towards that minus energy state by releasing some energy, and that makes everything unstable. So this is first of all not physical. So this is not physical or not observed, because we know for the simple system we are trying to describe observed. It is not true. We know that it is at least not true for the simplest system we know. So, or secondly, it is unstable. So how to solve this problem? So now we need something to do this, to resolve this contradiction. And it turns out that the solution is by considering this U operator, including the I, or by saying that the U is anti-unitary. So that is equivalent to saying that UIH is minus IUH. So this is basically this statement here. Now if I say that U is anti-unitary, which means U is written as a product of U and K, which is complex conjugation together, so such that when the U acts on IH, it automatically gives a minus I. So then you can write down this U as HU. So accepting the fact that U is an anti-unitary operator saves you from this problem where you get this E minus E partner. So that is my first reason that why you need anti-unitary operators to begin with. So that's where I will end here, and I will pick up this topic from here tomorrow, and we will discuss about how to construct a representation for one-dimensional and two-dimensional Hilbert space for this kind of anti-unitary operators. So that's all. If you have questions, you can ask. Try to do the algebra once by yourself, because there is this plus minus sign and this kind of things can get confusing. But I hope you got the idea that where are we going, why we need what we have.
Hello, sir.
Yes.
I had some doubt in the last class, mainly algebraic. Can
Okay.
I present my screen?
Sure. So I have to unpresent mine.
So, okay, there was just one small doubt when you were talking about unitary operators in today's class, while taking it from, let's say, a chi1 state to a chi prime state. There we were just talking about chi which was changing or varying with respect to a phase factor, right? It's just the same
No, I
where-
am just saying that. No, sorry, I probably didn't get the question. Can you elaborate it a little more?
Yes, sir. So after you stated the Wigner's theorem, you mentioned about unitary operators, then you spoke about linear and antilinear
Hmm.
operators. So there so when we applied the unitary operator u to a state chi1 and we sort of mapped it to a state chi1 prime. So there was chi1 prime referring to a state that was just changing with respect to its global phase, or is it a different state itself?
Yeah, as you know that it can have a global phase, that doesn't matter. But the only
Yeah.
fact that it is the C1 and C2, whatever it was for a unitary. So the definition of this anti-unitary or antilinear is that if the unitary is C1, C2, the antilinear will be C1 star and C2 star. So that is the only change in the definition. And the chi's are basis states, of course. It doesn't matter if you have add them, give them an arbitrary phase factor which is global. That will nothing will change there.
So the chi primes were representing the same state itself. I mean, even though we call it the basis states, it's the same
Yeah,
state.
it represents the same state. Yeah.
Sure. Thank you, sir.
We'll do examples that will become clear.
So,
Yes.
can you see the screen?
Yes.
Yeah. So when we wrote the total intensity part that's going on the screen, so we wrote an expression like this yesterday, but it's not very clear to me because intensity of in terms of interference, what we write is I
No,
is I1
this
plus
was not the intensity. Okay, maybe so this is just the superposition. The intensity is squared of that.
Okay, so what was this I denoting then?
Yeah, probably I was casual with notation. It is just the, so you remember last time when we did this double slit experiment, we wrote the total intensity as we added these two wave functions and then squared it. Okay, so this is
Yes.
basically adding these two wave functions. Yeah, no, it is accurate in the next line. So when I squared it, then I get these cross terms, right?
Yeah, that's what I meant. Like when you
Yeah.
square it, you get the cross terms. Okay.
Yeah, then I get the cross terms.
And
That's
one more problem, like you said that it's just a plane wave that's incident, right? But okay, the form is not immediately familiar to me because like
Oh
when
yeah,
when you
so
say plane wave,
that is because you look it up, that plane wave in cylindrical shape. It is not just so you are having trouble with the square root rho factor.
no, I'm also like when you say plane wave, I think of something of the form e to the power I kx minus omega t, something like that.
No,
Right?
this is that we also did. This is a static problem. Yeah, you can put the omega t, but the omega t will factor out. It will not matter.
Okay,
You can
so
also
it's
put the omega
plane
t.
wave in cylindrical coordinates, right?
Yeah, you look up this plane wave in cylindrical coordinates, plane wave in spherical. Coordinate means cylindrical symmetry and spherical symmetry. You will see the spherical one you will write as 1 by r, the cylindrical one as 1 by square root r, and the plane wave in Cartesian will not have any such factors.
Okay, so this was our first wave function of the upper beam, say, and the lower beam, and then we multiplied it by e to the power ig factor, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ig.
Okay. It
Yeah.
was something like e to the power ig we wrote.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This is clear. One more.
So the rho factor anyway doesn't matter here. You can think it on also in terms of that. But I am putting it because the system has a cylindrical symmetry, because you turn on the magnetic field vertical from the plane, out of the plane. That is why it has the cylindrical symmetry. That is why I put that.
Okay. Yeah. Here you said you refer the calculation in Griffiths. Griffiths writes the exact same two lines that you wrote. Okay. So when you're squaring that term, there are these two terms, right? Divergence of A and then A dot del. Okay. And then this term is going to 0. What I'm getting is just this term, right? But in the final expression you wrote, there was just 2i h bar q A dot del. So I'm not getting where this 2 coming from.
Okay. So that I have to write down this equation. So let me see if I have my.
Okay, I'll tell you one more problem and then maybe we can do this
Yeah.
together. Okay, yeah, here. Like I asked in the last class. So the problem was the form we had of the electromagnetic force was this, right? So when you use the vector identity, it expands something like this. But in the final expression you wrote, the potential incorporates just this one term, this v dot a, right? Only this term comes in. So what about the other three terms?
Yeah, the other 10 terms will somehow go to 0, but I have to check the algebra. Just
Okay.
Just a minute, if I don't remember if I have done that. Yeah, I'm looking at my note. Okay, so can you do one thing? Can you put these two pages? You have this screenshot or something. Can you put it in Piazzas as that I remember? These are both are algebraic problem, right?
Yeah, yes, sir.
Yeah, so this is just 2-3 lines of algebra which I have somewhere in my note, but this I will just write it down there.
Okay. So
Right.
one conceptual thing, like
Hmm.
we said the enough Bohm effect for magnetic field. Then you just briefly said that it works for the electric field as well.
Yeah.
But can you just tell some configurations wherein we talk about there is no electric field present, but we have some scalar potential which interacts with the wave function?
I don't think for electric field it is easy to find an example of that. That is why the electric field example is not so cool. The magnetic field example is much more cool. But that's the interesting point. I cannot think about anything like that immediately. I don't think it happens in electric field that you have a. Can it happen that you have a potential but
Yeah,
no
that's
field?
weird.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, it can happen. Because the potential is the field is what grad v, right?
yes.
If the potential is constant, then it will be like that, right? So, but how you generate such a constant potential? So you need a equilibrium situation. Yeah, I think you need if it doesn't have a spatial variation, which means it's constant everywhere in space, then that is the situation.
But
But
then till infinity, or like if a particle is present
there will be a
here, the
boundary, right? You
potential,
are meant to say there will be a boundary.
yeah, then a particle somewhere at the other end of the universe will
Yeah,
experience that.
somewhere it will experience that. So yeah, so that's a good point. But the experiment is usually done in that manner that you put two cylindrical rods or yeah, you put two cylindrical rods or cylindrical hollow cylinders and let the particle pass through it. But as soon as it's entering, it will experience a difference, right? 0 to non-zero. So that is true. Yeah, but the main point is that it will just experience that in those 1 points, right? This 1 point where it is entering that cylinder. I have to think a little bit more. Yeah, I cannot
I know.
think in real time.
Suppose we don't even know what all potential the particle is experiencing. Suppose there is some other system which has
Mm,
created a which has non like zero electric field, but we have potential everywhere in the world.
mm, mm.
And now you're doing the experiment. You're
Then
thinking
you
that
won't see any difference. You have to let the particle have two spatial separated region where
okay,
it experiences two different potential. Then only interference will happen, right?
okay, yeah, I get
You
that.
understand what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
yeah. The phase we need the phase difference
We
for
need
the
the phase difference. If it is dipped in a constant potential everywhere in the world, then nothing will happen. You need a difference. So usually it is done in this way. And but I have to think a little bit about this point you are saying. So can you stop presenting or
yeah.
can I enforce that? Okay, no.